Hey, what's up? Welcome to the Loaf. Today I'm actually getting ready for a performance. It's a podcast, so you can't see me, but just imagine that my makeup looks so good as I'm putting it on throughout this whole video. But because of that reason, I thought instead of getting lost in the weeds of something where I need to have my brain fully on for. My brain should probably be on for most things that I do, but it's not always. I thought today that I could talk a little bit about my testimony, just because some people asked, and you know, tell you a little bit more about myself, even though this podcast should not be about me at all. Let's get to know each other, and by that I mean me. Okay, this is already off to quite the interesting start. I feel like whenever I meet people from the church, they always want to ask about like your testimony first. And I think that's great. Don't get me wrong. I think it's a good place to, actually, I'm going to be so real. I get very, very scared when I meet new people and their first question to me is like, so when did you meet God? I'm like, okay, that's a really deep question to jump off. I was hoping that maybe we would start with like names, or like favorite restaurant, like maybe like some icebreakers, but sometimes we just jump in straight into it. And so they're like, so did you grow up in a Christian family? And you're like, oh, okay, we're diving deep right away. And sometimes that scares me, I'm not gonna lie. And one of the reasons being is because I've always felt like a little bit of an imposter with my testimony because I don't really have one, which obviously is fake because everybody has what Christians would call a testimony. Everybody who knows God has a relationship and a story to that relationship. But where some people's testimonies are like action movies and bestsellers, mine is like, I don't even have a good analogy. I was hoping something would come out. Mine is like the most boring local newspaper that went out of business when newspapers were even still popular. Basically, I don't have a great testimony, not in the fact that it isn't great, because like everybody who comes to Jesus knows how great that is, and God is good whether it's dramatic or not. But in the terms of like, would a church ever ask me to come and talk about my testimony to people? No, not at all. And I even remember in college having one friend who was very Christian, and and I mean that not even just like faith, but like, in the way that she was able to talk like Christians talk, and had the stories, and went to the Christian high school and all that thing. And I just remember she was like, and then one night I broke down and started crying, and that was the moment I became Christian. And I remember, beautiful story. I should have been like, wow, my friend, I'm so happy for you. So I was a little bit jealous. I'm not gonna lie, because I was like, dang, I don't have a moment. And then I feel like when I started getting more into church culture, everybody was like, well, what's your moment? And I was like, God, did we ever have a moment? Because I don't. In fact, the closest thing I have to a moment is I went to church when I was a little kid, and the Bible study teacher, she said, okay, has anybody not accepted Jesus into their heart? And I was probably like third grade. And I was like, I don't know. But nobody else raised their hand in this Bible, like a Sunday school group. And so I said, well, if nobody else is raising their hand, I'm not going to raise my hand and say that I'm the only one in this room that isn't a part of this secret club, because, I was a third grader and I didn't really understand. And so I remember, I think there maybe was like one brave soul who raised their hand and was like, no. And they're like, okay, well, we're going to go to the back of the Sunday school classroom and you're going to accept Jesus into your heart. And then our Bible studies teacher, I honestly don't remember anything about the person who was teaching the Bible study, anybody else in the class. I just remember this so clearly because she was like, well, you can write the date that you accepted Jesus into your heart onto the cover, like the inside cover of your Bible. And I remember getting home and I had this cute little Bible. It was like a little like half-sized mini Bible, and it fit inside of like, it had like its own little like purse carrying case, which I thought was the cutest thing in elementary school. And I said, a little pink Bible in a bag? Yes, please. fashionista even as a child. I say as I'm in baggy sweats right now. Anyway, not important. And so I remember I came home to my mom and I was like, well, when did I accept Jesus into my heart? And I think there was a part of me that's like, he's in there. Like, but like, I don't know when he moved in. I don't have the lease contract. So I don't know how long he's been in there. And my mom was like, well, it doesn't really matter. Actually, I don't really remember exactly what she said, but all I know is that I ended up going through on my mom's like old MacBook, like one of like the first MacBooks ever, and we just chose a random day. And of course, elementary school, it's tough being a kid, and I was definitely like a dorky, cringy little kid. Like, kids who are grown up on TikTok now don't even understand how much of cringe I could give back then. So I thought Friday the 13th was like the coolest date. And I was like, well, I want Friday the 13th. And so we went back and we picked a random day from history that I was alive in. And I was like, yep. And we wrote that date in the front cover of the Bible. I wish I still had that exact Bible so I could tell you what my fake date was. But I do not. I don't know what happened to it. So... that is something that happened. And I realize now I'm just jumping all over the place. All that to say is I don't have a date and I don't have a come to Jesus moment. And I think for a long time I felt very imposter syndrome about that because I was like, and honestly for a long time I was like, am I even Christian? Because I don't remember a before and after. And so my little anxious brain said, okay, so then clearly there's no after and I'm not a Christian and I'm going to hell. And I think God, being right there was like, okay, so not exactly, but we'll work on it. We'll get you to a place. And that was like probably like 2 years ago where I was like, uh-oh, have I never been a Christian this whole time? Which again, I think that was like a little bit of, I started going to church a lot and was hanging out with very like Christian people. And I say that not even necessarily like Christian, they're very into the Bible, they have a deep relationship with God, but people who are they go to church a lot. They go to church multiple times a day, or not multiple times a day, multiple times a week, but yes, multiple times a day, I guess would also fit into this category. And they are the type of people who, when they pray, it sounds like a Christian prayer, and they know how to use words like fellowship and testimony. And there was a part of me that was like, wow, am I not Christian? Because I feel like an outsider in this community. That must mean that I don't know God and I don't have a moment. So that must mean that I'm not Christian. And that was honestly, saying it now, I'm like, I think that was a little crazy. I don't think that was true. And I think that there was a part of me during that was also like, that can't be true. But it was the fear of like, but what if it is? Now I think I've kind of passed that. It might be an intrusive thought where I'm like, uh-oh, am I not a Christian? But I think that that's more, as I said, like an intrusive thought. Now I'm kind of like, no, you are, like, calm down. And then I'll be like, hey, God, can you calm me down? Because I think I'm spiraling a little bit. And then, sometimes I continue to spiral. Sometimes he helps me out and, like, stops it right then and there. But what was I saying? Oh yeah, I just felt like an imposter because I didn't like have a moment, and everybody else was like, well, you have to like have a come to Jesus moment. And I think that's also why I always get scared when people are like, tell me about your upbringing in the church. Tell me about your testimony. When did you become a Christian? I'm like, I don't know how to answer that question. And one of the reasons why is because I said this to somebody and they thought I was crazy. I was like, for me, God is the opposite of Santa Claus in the fact that, bear with me for a second, I never believed that Santa Claus existed. When I was a kid, I don't know if it's just because I had older siblings, like I never believed in Santa Claus. My parents would give gifts from Santa Claus, but I was like, yeah, no, sorry if you're a kid. If you're a kid who's watching this, apologies. Santa's totally real. Anyway, I would be like, there's no way that this guy is coming down my chimney. And so I never had a moment where I like realized that Santa Claus wasn't real, but he totally is if you're a kid. Because I never believed in him in the first place. I was like, no, that's not a thing. God is like the opposite of that, where I'm like, yeah, no, he exists. I think I've really always known God. I've never had a time when I didn't believe in him. But I also don't remember like a moment where I was like, oh, God is real. You know, I think it was always just kind of like, well, yeah, obviously. Like, what did you think? And I'm officially doing eyeliner, so give me just 1 second while I try not to mess this up. Oh, I think I just messed it up. Okay, it's fine. It's a little baby wing. That's what I'm gonna tell myself. Anyway, sorry, now I had to do the other eye. But yeah, I never really had a moment where I like didn't believe in God. And I think in a lot of ways I'm very lucky for that because I feel like I've always known him and I don't know how I would have survived without always having God with me. But I also, again, don't really have a testimony because I'm like, I don't really know if I ever didn't know him, which is crazy. But I do always remember, I feel like I've said this multiple times already, like, whenever I was about to hit rock bottom, I never could. Like, I physically could not because God was there. And I remember that even like being in elementary school, middle school, having like a little kid crash out because being in middle school and elementary school is low-key hard. Like childhood is hard. And whenever I see middle schoolers now, I'm like, don't worry, does it get better or do you get stronger? Probably both. But like being in kid is hard, and looking back you're like, wow, my trials and tribulations as a fifth grader were not that bad, but like at the time they really are. And so I always just remember that even in like my little kid crash outs, God was always there, and I always knew that. And oh, I definitely have some like journals with prayers in them that are so funny. And I really, you read them and you kind of want to cringe or like be embarrassed of your little kid self. But I'm like, I was figuring it out and I was right there begging God for help as a kid with the silliest little things. But I think even now I try to be like, hey, I'm going to bring every silly little thing to God because it might be silly, but if it's weighing on me, it's weighing on me. And the sillier, the more I should bring it to God so he can help me out with it and realign me to feel better. But I remember as a kid, I would always do that. That being said, that was my blush clicking. Don't worry about it. That being said, I also know that my understanding of God when I was younger was not great. I knew him very much as a friend and as a presence in my life and a comfort. I did not theologically know him very well at all, really. He was like a best friend that I like didn't know his last name, didn't know where he lived, didn't know where he grew up, which, you know what, as an adult, low-key, I don't know anybody's last name, so maybe this is just a personal problem for me, but like genuinely, like I all of my friends I've met in adulthood, I don't know their last names, and that's a little concerning. But like, I don't know, I don't introduce people with my full legal name, and then I like put people's phones and names in my contact, and then next thing I know, I've known them for like 3 years. I'm like, actually, who are you? So anyway, I didn't know God very well, practically speaking. Even now, I'm gonna be so honest, my understanding of who's who in the Bible and nitty gritty little things like that, like, I'm not the best at them, if I'm being honest. And we work to get better. So I remember being a kid and kind of thinking God was kind of like a fairy godmother or a genie or somebody that, you know, you just like asked him for things. And that is, I think, honestly, something that's quite common. I think a lot of people, kids, adults, kind of treat God like that. I still treat God like that. I'm like, hey, can I? And then I think God's, hey, like, hey, can you ask me something else? Can you just talk to me? And I'm like, so anyway, a job? And he's like, hey. So I think it's quite common to have that. But definitely when I was a kid, I knew God, but I didn't know him perhaps in the way that I should. I think it was the end of high school that I got very interested in learning more about God. And I think I mentioned this in one of my other podcast clips. I've never been good at the Bible. People have been like, hey, if you want to get to know God, read the Bible. And I'd be like, great. And then I'd go and read the Bible. And I'd say, okay, am I too dumb to be a Christian? Because when I read this, I'm confused. I don't get it. So maybe I'm alone in that, but I would always get very confused. I'm the type of person who gets to the end of the Bible page and says, so what did I just read? And at the time, I didn't. It's hard because when you do read the Bible and you're like, okay, this is what I should be listening to, this is God's words, I know that this will not lead me astray. But when you read it and you go, help, I don't know what this says, you do have to rely on theologians or reading plans or people kind of trying to help you out. And you don't always know where those people are coming from. And so I guess it was probably my senior year of high school, I got a little bit more interested, family drama, growing up, growing pains, refiguring out the relationship with your parents once you kind of realize that they're not perfect and you might have to put up some more boundaries than perhaps you want to, was happening. So a lot of growing pains, again, middle school, high school, college, all of the things. Tough times all around. And so I was leaning a little bit more into faith, but picking up my Bible and trying to read it, honestly, didn't really work for me. I didn't feel any closer to God. I was just confused, and then I would get a little bit more frustrated. Still, I was like talking to God, trusting in Him, because He had, as I kind of said, been my safety net for my entire life. And that felt very comfortable. Don't get me wrong, I definitely kind of had hey, I go to God when things are going bad and I forget about Him in good times. And I still sometimes do that, but sometimes I also don't go to Him during bad times. We're always growing and changing, and sometimes that means we get worse and then we get better and then we get way worse. But I had a little bit of He was my safety net. I only interacted when things were going poorly. Not great, but it happened. And for that reason, I thought I said that end of that sentence because I thought I could remember where I was going to go with it, and then I totally forgot where I was going with it. Basically, end of high school, had some struggles, wanted to look for God a little bit closer. Could not figure out the Bible. So I was like, okay, I need somebody to kind of help me figure this out, tell me what's happening. And I have always been a YouTube baby, okay? That's my generation. I love me some YouTube. So that's, of course, where I went to try to find some theology, some help on what all these passages mean. And I found some people who were good. And then I found some people who weren't. And you know what's crazy? So people who are in Christian culture or on Christian YouTube will find this probably, I hope, funny. I fell into 2 YouTube channels in succession. We went hard turn from John MacArthur and Sid Roth. Okay, so if you don't know who those people are, John MacArthur has a cult following for sure. Very conservative. He recently, or maybe not so recently, passed, but he had a huge presence online, and he was very classic conservative Christian in a suit behind the pedestal. Yeah. And I would listen to some of his sermons. He had a lot of sermons, and he was very by the book, which is good for Christianity. Sid Roth is the exact opposite, although they do look similar. Okay, they're both old dudes. And Sid Roth has a quote unquote, yeah, that's how it is, quote unquote Christian channel, and he has this thing called Sid Roth, it's supernatural. And I almost just burned myself with a hair tool. I kind of fell into his YouTube channel. I don't know how. I think it was some testimony from somebody who was like, I'm an ex-witch and now I'm a Christian. And for some reason I said, that sounds like great background noise while I clean my bathroom. And I didn't take a long stop with Sid Roth, but he's he's not real. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I would not listen to him. He's very much that type of Christian that says, we're going to speak in tongues. And then he's like, just speak gibberish, and that's the Lord speaking. And I was like, I think the Lord uses words and art and well thought out things, not just a room full of people mumbling. I think Sid Roth kind of comes from that generation of prosperity, and I mean, we still have it. It's not like it's a gone thing. But that speaking in tongues and mumbling, and I'm pretty sure speaking in tongues is people actually speaking real languages that exist, and then being able to understand tongues is being able to understand a language that you don't know, like academically, but it has to be a real language. Anyway, so I think I stopped there for a little bit on my journey, and then I said, hey, okay, even I, somebody who's not super theologically well versed, knows that something's a little funky here, and I don't think I believe what's happening on this quote unquote Christian channel. So then I left. I listened to John MacArthur a little bit more. Low-key got very offended when he had these things where people from his church could come up and just ask him questions. And he's very knowledgeable guy. But he had one where I think somebody asked about like ballet, and he was like, oh, I hate it. I would never go to a ballet, or something like that. And I just remember being like, well, I don't love that. Such a stupid thing to like be annoyed with. But I still listened to some of his sermons. He had like a catalog of sermons, like going back all the way to like the 70s or something. So he has been around for a while, and I think his media team is very good. And his catalog of sermons, I think they're still out there. I think his church still like posts reruns of him, and I would say he's a very biblically like safe teacher. So he does everything, again, kind of by the book, which is good for Christianity. But I think after a while, I don't know. I think sometimes I would listen to him and I'd be like, yeah, I get what you're saying. And then I wouldn't get what he was saying. So I stopped there for a little bit. And then in college, I really wanted to read the whole Bible in a year. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I've never read through the Bible all the way. So I'm going to read through the Bible in a year. Well, my 1 year read through took me 5. And or maybe it took me 3. I don't know. It took many years though. And I will say, I did not understand a lot of it. I was confused for a lot of it. I think I did the Bible reading app because it was easy in college to be able to read off of my phone. And I did the one, I think it's like the Bible Project, where it would basically like give you a summary of the book that you were about to read and be like, this is why this book is important and this is what it's telling you. And that was very helpful. But I still got to the end being like, I don't really know what I was supposed to get from that. And don't get me wrong, I think reading the Bible all the way through is important. I think for a lot of people, reading the Bible through every year is a really great way of staying in the Word and learning more. I have since moved away from that just because, again, I don't know if I have a small, smooth little brain, but I prefer to really sit in books now and like spend a week on one psalm or spend a month on one passage. I have been in Daniel for 6 months at this point. I really like Daniel, but also I think it's just helpful for me because I have to sit with something for a very long time before it kind of starts to make sense to me. So I like to sit in books for a very long time now until I kind of start to get an inkling of what's actually happening. But that's a total personal thing. And do whatever makes you feel like you're connecting with God and learning about the Bible the most. Anyway, so I tried to read through the Bible in college, and I joined a small church because my entire life we had gone to church. I was a Christian. My family was Christian, but we were not Christian in the sense of like, I feel like you have cultural Christians who don't really believe in God but do the Christian thing. You have Christians who are faithfully Christian but don't fit in with the Christian culture. Then you have Christians who are in the culture and in the church and with God. And as much as I was always talking to God, always known God, I have never felt welcome at churches, just to be blunt. Like, my childhood with churches was so not fantastic. I went to youth group in high school, or maybe it was middle school. I went once and I never went back because it was so scary for me. I remember I knew nobody, and the whole thing was just icebreakers, basically, like icebreaker games, and nobody talked to me. They put us in groups and nobody talked to me. I was, oh, sorry, that was my curling iron. I was honestly just humiliated, and I was like, I'm never going back. So whenever we went to that church, I would just go sit in like the adult service, and I never went back to a youth group actually ever again, I don't think, just because it was so terrible. I knew one person, actually. They went to my school, and I tried to go up and say hi to them, and they pretended that they didn't know me. Traumatizing, horrific, never went back. So I've never felt like I was accepted in the church, which is always, listen, do we have a little bit of a interesting relationship with churches because of this? Yes. But my family was very Christian growing up, but we were not the typical Christians. My parents grew up in that kind of like 80s Christian, follow the rules, go to church 8 times a week Christianity. And for them, I think they really wanted us to do Christianity and believe in Christianity because that's what we believe, not because that's what we're being made to do. And so they have always let us, me and my siblings, do and find the faith that is real to us. And I do, as much as sometimes I'm like, man, I don't know all the Bible characters, and sometimes I feel like an imposter now when I go to church, I do really respect my parents for letting me choose my own faith. I think that has been really important, that it's always been my own. And yes, it was messy when I was a kid, and it may not still be like the most biblically accurate. Well, no, I'm working on getting it biblically accurate. When I was a kid, as I kind of said, kind of treated him, God, like a fairy godmother in a sense. But it's always been my own, and it's always been my relationship. But for that, I think spiritually, I've always been very Christian. Biblically, I think I'm Christian. But culturally, I've never fit in with the church Christian crowd, which has also always kind of made me feel like an imposter in my own faith. Again, do we have some issues that we're working through? Yeah, but you know what? Who doesn't? We all got issues. Where was I in the story? Oh, don't have a great relationship with church. Yeah, like the physical building. We have some. I was gonna say trauma, but like the TikTok trauma equivalent, not real trauma. And so in college, I started going to a small little church on campus, and that was good. It was very small, but yeah, I also had classes every year during like the crew, which is where I think a lot of the Christian student population kind of hung out. So still never really felt like I was part of like the Christian group. But yeah, so I started reading the Bible, getting to know theologically a little bit more about God, a little bit better. And honestly, it's been the same trajectory ever since. And so I say I kind of have a boring testimony because I feel like my journey with Christ has just been like the world's slowest incline hike. We're just every day, we just grow a little bit more. Every once in a while, it'll dip back down and we go, oops. But like, it's just a very slow and steady, whoa, excuse me, a slow and steady continuation of growth. There's been no big peaks and pits and turbulence. It's just been a very slow incline, which again, I think in some ways I'm very grateful for, that it's just always been kind of there and consistent and nice. But ever since, I have gotten better at praying, and then I forget to pray. And then I get better at praying, and then I join a church, and then I have friends, and then, it's a slow and steady incline to loving God more and knowing more about Him. And then now we're here. I did try to start some type of Christian something or other a couple times before this podcast. And I think that there's always been something where I'm like, oh, I want to do something like this. But like one of them was in college and I was like, I don't know enough. I still don't know enough. But I think back then, like I really was new to taking faith seriously as a pillar in my life, not just my safety net, I guess. And I really wanted to do something, but I think I didn't really have enough experience or practical wisdom to really make that a fruitful endeavor. And then I've tried a couple other little things, but not with any clear intention. Is there a clear intention here, you might ask? And I would tell you, maybe. But for some reason, this one just feels a little bit better. Like I have a little bit more of a where am I going with this? I kind of know. Like I have a general direction, and it might fail, and that's also okay. But yeah, I think I've always wanted to do something more Christ focused in my life. But it's hard because I do spend a lot of time in very, what we'd call a secular artist world. And I do feel very much called to be in those spaces. And it's weird to be a Christian and say a lot of times I feel more comfortable in non-Christian spaces. And I just burnt my hand. I've always had a desire to be around Christ and Christians more, but then as I kind of said, I have some, unresolved problems where I also feel very uncomfortable sometimes in those spaces and like I don't belong or I'm not allowed to be there. And that's just being very vulnerable and letting you in, letting strangers the internet into my deepest, darkest parts of my soul. Hi, welcome. I don't really think you want to be there. But yeah, there's definitely some stuff there that I'm working through, but I also feel kind of called to not necessarily confine myself to just Christian only spaces, just because I'm a big proponent of Christians need to be out in the world, not just in the Christian spaces. And that's where I go. I feel like there's a lot of people who need kindness and love in the arts world, and it is hard to come across. The arts world can be really dark and scary and not friendly. It can also be really amazing, but I think that there are a lot of people who really need some light in the arts world, and I try to be that as much as I can. And there are Christians there, don't get me wrong. I like to think about this is not something I've come up with, but somebody said, if you hold up a candle in the middle of the Super Bowl with all of the lights and the people and the cameras and the flashing and in broad daylight, let's say are Super Bowls daylight? I don't know. Clearly I'm not a sports person. But if you hold up a candle during the Super Bowl at noon, it doesn't do much, like it's there, you have light, but it's in the sea of a lot of other light, and your candle is beautiful. But if you take that same candle and you hold it up in the middle of the wilderness where it is the only light around, like I don't know if anybody's ever been out in the woods at like midnight when there is no other light around. It is a life source. Like that is life-saving in those instances. It's just so much brighter than a light could ever be at a very bright place. I'm not doing a good job at explaining this, but I've felt a calling to be in those very dark spaces with a little bit of light. And I think I've gotten a lot of pushback from friends who are Christian, kind of saying like, hey, you shouldn't go out into the darkness. You shouldn't go out into the wilderness. And I can see where they're coming from, of course, but I've also kind of been like, that's where I feel like I should be. Not because I want to be consumed by darkness, but because they need a flashlight out there. Like, it's dark. And so, again, all just things, I have no answers, but just things that I'm kind of thinking about in my own life. So I'm trying to figure out which way to curl this piece of hair to make it look good. If I do it like this, it's gonna curl it towards my face, I think. So I need to do this way. No, see, that's wrong. Curling your hair is truly an art form, and I don't think I'm cut out for this. Anyway, that's kind of where I am right now. But I would love to have some more Christian interaction, Christian friends, and a little bit more community. I don't know. And here I am. I'm just wandering and I don't know what I'm doing. But I have hope for the future and I have Jesus. And that's all I really need. It's the most lackluster end to a testimony I've ever heard. But yeah, that's kind of it. As I kind of said, I don't really have like a testimony, and I feel like YouTube has tons of testimonies of people with these crazy stories, and they're cool. As I said, like when I was in high school, I was like, X witch turns to be a Christian. Well, that sounds cool, and it is. And I think those are super powerful stories. So why am I wasting the upload bandwidth of YouTube with this? Because I think quiet and small miracles are just the same as big ones. You know, I've never been a Christian who has had flashy miracles in my life. I've never heard God's voice. I've never, and now part of it is I have friends who are able to like, I think literally like their spiritual gift is being able to see where God is working in their life. I'm not very good at that, to be honest. My friend would be like, wow, isn't that amazing that God gave you exactly what you needed right here through this, this, and this? And I'm like, whoa, yeah, no, wait, that's actually very cool. I would have never seen that. So I'm very grateful for those friends who are able to be like, hey, so this is actually really cool. And I'm like, yeah, nope, just completely missed that because I'm me. But I'm trying to be better at picking up on instances like that. But I've never been somebody who's like heard God, had a big flashy miracle or a life-changing moment. I think my life has been a lot of very small miracles. Even just the fact that Jesus still cares about me is very miraculous. And so, yeah, I don't know. I guess sometimes I feel a little bit like an imposter because it feels very normal. But I'm also very grateful that God has always felt very normal to me. So that's my boring little testimony. So you guys can know me a little bit better when I yap to you about random things. I don't know, I feel like I'm like, what's a takeaway? I don't have anything. That's just me. Yeah, let me know. Do you have a cool testimony? Are you kind of chilling with me with the little miracles? Thank you guys so much for being here, listening to me. I hope you made some cool art while listening to this or did some chores, and I will see you guys in the next episode.